So I will be discussing a project that I worked on as a research fellow. Oh, no, it's going by itself. A research fellow with UNDPO, so the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, which is just part of their broader work on tracking mis and disinformation and hate speech in across different social media platforms in countries where the UN has peacekeeping operations, and trying to incorporate some of the monitoring work that's been done by UNDPO to kind of record a lot of radio stations and to come up with machine learning models that could integrate some of this radio information into other kinds of social media analysis. So the main challenge that we were facing were that radio broadcasts remain a very key and primary source of information among a lot of these contexts where peacekeeping missions are present, but they come with kind of these massive volumes of conversational style text, and they present some very unique challenges for understanding the key messages in this text that are relevant to these operations and knowing what's happening on the ground. So in this presentation, I will first take you through this kind of problem that we're facing and what we came up with to try to digest the text a little bit better so that we could compare it across other platforms, and then briefly give you two examples of how we were able to conduct some topic analysis on these chunks once we came up with this method, and then in the context of the DRC, and then also look to kind of match what was going on in the radio to specific narratives we were interested in tracking in the context of Lebanon. Again, this is part of like a broader work that the UN is completing, which has been recognized, as trying to provide some cutting edge research across the agency, and also has implications for improving alert platforms, which we hope this kind of radio analysis and text will be kind of transferable to a lot of other platforms such as YouTube, TikTok, as we try to integrate those into the kind of traditional tweet or post setting that's been used previously. So the challenges with radio are there tend to be these very long meandering passages with very unique syntax and conversation styles and sometimes imperfect translations from different languages in the context. And there are all these idioms, jingles, there's music interspersed, topics pivot quickly. It's not really clear what is a coherent story or thought the way that you would get with a social media post. And the UN's recordings were in these 5-minute chunks. The breaks were kind of arbitrary, and it was very difficult to track what was going on. So we tried a lot of different methods kind of on the team previously, which looks at kind of fixed sentence numbers, trying to understand based on training classifiers and topics, and just the general ideas that you would come up with at the start. And they didn't really work so well because of these challenges. So to confront this issue, we actually came up with more of a rule-based method based on conversation styles that would cut the text in logical slices, which could then be compared and have key topics. So the idea is kind of this triple S method. So first, we had to select which of these longer segments had any kind of relevant topics present based on Boolean query of different keywords, and also keywords related to larger sets of topic words related to the conflict or the peacekeeping mission. That's the first step to kind of in the filtering process. Then these chunks were scanned sequentially to code which sentences might be relevant to the topic and to look at sequential sentences such that, if there was one interjection somebody made, that wouldn't necessarily break the chunk. But there were some of these penalization rules with keeping chunks together in like a sentence, sequential sentences. And then there was a lot of cleaning done in slicing the data to break chunks after relevance was lost for a certain period of time, remove these extra jingles that were kind of just interjecting themselves into the text, and kind of these signed off phrases that would indicate a reporter was changing in the radio show. Let's see if I can, yes. So this is a little bit more detail. Maybe we don't have to get into this completely, but there were lots of different rules that were based on this DRC context and then later on the Lebanese context, which had these strategic deletions and semantic breaks. And this proved a lot more effective at breaking up the radio data than some of the previously established methods that were maybe a little bit more organic but less rule-based. So now this is being adopted to all the different UN peacekeeping contexts with slight changes in the rules to account for different styles of conversation and radio in the different contexts. And this has allowed us to have unique chunks of information, of text that is on a specific topic with a specific voice. And now we're able to use these specific, very clear paragraphs of text to do topic analysis and also to tag them with certain narratives related to MDH and also resilient narratives that the UN's interested in tracking. So in general, we used BERT and some AI embeddings to code for specific topics in the context of the DRC. And so these two different approaches, the DRC context, we wanted to see generally what was happening on the radio and how this narratives flowed to social media. So we allowed the machine learning elements to create which topics were present from the data set that we gave it across this summer. So it wasn't looking for specific narratives, but any sort of narratives related to the conflict or the peacekeeping mission, and they were interested to see, okay, what topics are actually happening. So we did this in various different ways, and depending on how stringent we were for how many topics we wanted or how many posts could be per topic, we were able to see that there was this kind of cross-pollination among radio data and Twitter data on these different topics, and that there were some shared topics that were emerging from this analysis, which was interesting because we weren't sure necessarily that there would be kind of this cross-pollination across platforms. So these were some topics we were interested in. Then I chose maybe 5 different topics that I found interesting and tried to look at when things appeared on Twitter or the radio. This maybe isn't super informative, but we do see sort of a pattern where earlier in the period of time when the topics emerge, there's a radio story, and then maybe it gets picked up on Twitter for a while. There's some traffic and more opinionated posts, and then the topic comes back later on, maybe in another radio story. And this is to be expected because radio is a little bit more news-based, and we'll see a little bit later on that a lot of the tone is more a news narrative rather than opinionative chatter that you would see on social media. And then we're able to use an OpenAI API to generate summaries and also to tell us how the radio and Twitter channels treated these topics differently, and also a little bit of description about how they flowed from one to another. And I could ask kind of whatever I wanted about specific topics, and it would give me a paragraph on how, the platforms treated them and what kind of discussions were happening among radio and Twitter. So some example of this is a nice table which shows the differences of when the topic started. For example, in this one, radio picked it up a little bit earlier, and then it got transferred to Twitter and amplified. And then also a little bit about the tone of each of these channels. So radio tends to be more news-based, neutral, whereas Twitter tends to get like these stories blown up and more excited. So you can see how that transfers across platforms and also maybe informs where you want to make an intervention. So earlier on, a radio story can kind of set the tone for what's happening on Twitter, but then the Twitter discussion, like the social media discussion, really gets kind of this urgent, active feeling. So then in Lebanon, we were actually interested in producing a report that looked at specific narratives that had already been kind of identified on social media. So we used the same chunking method, but then a slightly different technique to train a classifier to try to tag certain posts with specific narratives that we're interested in tracking. So again, we had around 80% accuracy, and actually the claims of partiality didn't work as well. So saying that UNIFIL was partial to a certain side or something like this was a little bit difficult to pick up and required reading between the lines. So we got some false positives there. But overall, we're able to tag narratives in ways that we wanted. I know I have 1 minute, so I will finish up quickly. So we looked at different radio and social media platforms and compared them. And then this is just kind of plotting over like the posts and minutes over time. And we're interested in these six or seven narratives about what was happening in the peacekeeping mission and kind of concerns that were circulating on social media. And we did find that radio fit into some of these narratives, but described more factual and news-based events as opposed to opinions and kind of subjective claims. But they gave details and specific events of some of these narratives occurring, maybe. But then what was interesting, and I'll close on this, is that these resilient narratives about the good work that UNIFIL was doing did really feature, especially on UN partner radio stations, and a follow-up study could look at the effectiveness of UN partner radio stations in permeating these positive, resilient narratives of what the mission was, why the mission was there and what it was doing and the work it was carrying out. and to see how well they permeated into non-UN partner radio stations. So in certain key events, maybe when the mission became more active, these narratives did feature on non-UN partner radio stations, but then they were consistent on the partner radio stations throughout. And because we've seen that radio can kind of set the tone for a lot of the social media channel, this is potentially a valuable intervention strategy. So yeah, that's it. In summary, we came up with a new way of chunking radio text and looked at tagging it with topics and specific narratives. It's now being implemented across different missions to try to enhance alert systems incorporating radio. And some follow-up studies I would love to do would be to look in more depth at the cross-platform flow analysis, evaluate the impact of partner stations, and maybe incorporate some speech diarization techniques. Thank you. Oh, I'll also leave you with an example of some of the lovely texts that we got from UNIFIL and how, which kind of highlight the difficulties the challenges we face in analyzing radio data to get meaningful results.